Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Today I'm going to be working on mounting roof trusses on my shed. I'm sharing this video for reference or entertainment purposes only. I'm not a carpenter or an expert in building by any stretch of the imagination, so keep that in mind when you watch through this series. There may be some things here that you'll find helpful, or maybe you'll see some mistakes I'm making along the way. Either way, what I show here isn't necessarily what you should do if you were building a shed. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, let's get on with the project. The first thing I need to do is add some bracing on the two end walls, so that's what I'll do now. Now that I have some bracing in place, I'll get the first truss lifted up and positioned. So I've got the truss placed roughly in position over here, and I'll clamp it to the bracing just to hold it in place. So now I'll check the positioning of the truss with relationship to the wall edges and get it centered. So now I'm going to remove the clamps on this side and just slide this over until it's even with the edge of the wall. And I'll also check to make sure it's flush with the face of the wall here. Then I'll clamp it back in place. So now I'm going to grab a 2x4 and put this up on top of the top plate behind the truss. So the 2x4 I'm using is 8 feet long and the wall is 12 feet long. So I'm going to roughly center it on the wall, and then I'm going to just put one screw in to hold it to the top plate for now. And I'm not sure if you guys can tell from over there or not, but this bottom cord on this truss has got pretty good bow in it. So I'm actually going to start from the middle, and I'm going to use my body weight to push down and make sure it's flush to the top of the wall. And once I've got it flush, I'll put a couple of screws in to hold it down. Everything looks pretty flush now. I'm going to put the rest of the screws into the backing board to hold it down to the top plate of the wall, and then I'll go put more screws in the cord to hold it to the backing board. So over here towards the end of the trusses where the 2x4x8 has stopped, I'm going to use some screws to toenail into the corners. And I'll do the toenailing on this side and the back side of the cord just for some extra strength. So this first truss is all set. I'm going to go repeat the process on the other side. So it looks like I lost a little bit of camera footage from installing my first couple of trusses, but I'll go through and show you guys what I'm doing on the next one. The process is more or less the same all the way through. I'm going to go freehand with the camera here for a minute, so hopefully things don't get too shaky. The first thing you'll notice is I have blocking between each of the trusses. Now the blocking will provide some rigidity to the roof, but the real reason I'm using it is because I don't have a helper to help me install these trusses. So when I lift them up onto the walls, I need something for it to rest on while I position it and then get it screwed in place. So the blocking provides that support that I need. Now I'm placing the blocking roughly halfway up the rafter length on both sides. I'm not getting too fussy with the measurement, but what I am making sure is that the blocking does not sit higher than the surface of the rafter so that when I put my plywood on, it doesn't interfere with it. Another thing I've done is I've set up a guide string to help me align the peaks of each of the trusses. I've got a screw sticking out at the very peak of each of the end trusses, and then I put the string across, and then once I get everything positioned, I can sight down the string and get the peak lined up with the string and know that I'm in the right place. So I'm going to start by installing the first screw where I want my blocking to be. So now I've got the block held up against the rafter, and I'm making sure that the top of it is flush or a little bit below the top edge of the rafter. Now I'll just sink the screw the rest of the way to hold the boards together. Now I'll put in a second screw below the first one to hold the bottom part of the block. Now I'll do the same thing on the opposing rafter. So now I'm going to get my truss lifted up into place. Now I've got my tall ladder positioned here just on this side of where the truss is going to be to help kind of guide and hold it. Now it won't hold the whole way to the truss, but what it will do is it'll help guide it and keep it from camming over and falling this way. Now the trusses aren't heavy, but I'm on the short side, so it's a little difficult for me to get them up over my head and positioned due to the height of the walls. But I've got a second ladder positioned so I can kind of walk up the ladder as I lift the truss up and over this front wall. You can see I've got the truss in place and I've got it leaning a little bit, so the bottom is just a little bit closer to the camera than the top, so that it's resting on the blocks. So now I'll position this end of the rafter so it's in line with the mark that I made on the top plate. Now I'll square up and position my block so that it's not above my rafter and sink the screw the rest of the way. Now I'll do the same thing on the back wall. So now I'll sight down the peak of the truss and see where it needs to go to line up to my string. And in this case, it needs to go that way just a little bit. So even though it's screwed into the blocking, I can move the truss and position it where I need to. So now I'll measure out the distance between the rafters to make sure that it's 24 inches. And in this case, I got to push the back in just a tiny bit. Now that I've got the back part of the truss positioned where I want it, I'm going to toenail one screw into the top plate just to hold it in place. Now I'll double check the front positioning of the truss. And just like I did for the back, now that I have it positioned where I want it, I'll toenail it in place so it doesn't move. So just as a last double check, I did another sight down the peak. Everything looks good. So now I'll put the rest of the screws in to hold this thing in place and then repeat the process for the rest of the roof trusses. So all the roof trusses are now in place. What I want to do next is put some framing on the two end trusses to catch the ends of the siding panels that I'm going to end up putting up. Now on this end of the shed, I'm also going to frame out a rough opening for a set of double doors up at the top so that I can slide some things in and out up there if I want to. Now I may not actually put the doors in during this build, I may do that at a later time, but since I'm here, I'll frame the opening and then that way it's ready for me when I'm ready to put the doors in. So I'm going to position these studs at the seams where the 4-foot panels are going to come together. And that happens to be right here, right above this stud. So what I'm going to do is measure out the distance between the bottom stringer here and the short side of my rafter. And then I'll grab a board and cut a 30-degree angle in it to fit in here. So I'm going to measure over my 4 feet, and then I'm going to go back 1.5 inches, which is right about here. And this doesn't have to be super perfect. And then I'm going to measure vertically at that point, and I'm getting 23 inches, so I'm going to start with that. And since I don't need these support boards here anymore, I'm going to take these down and use these for my stock. So since my stud should be identical on both sides, I'm going to cut both of them while I'm here. So I'm going to use the first one as a template to cut my second one. And I'm actually going to use this angle I've already cut in this board to my advantage, line everything up, mark this out, and then cut straight right here to make the second stud. So I'll bring this in place and I'll first make sure it lines up where I want it. And I'll make sure that this outer surface is flush to the top of the rafter. And now I'll just toenail it into the rafter and the stringer below. So now I want to put a horizontal board across these two studs to form the top of the door frame that I might eventually put in here. So I'll just measure out this distance and cut something to fit. 46.5 ought to do it. So I thought when I cut this board it would fit tight in between these studs and kind of hold itself in place, but that's not the case. I cut it right exactly to the length I need, so it won't stay. So it's going to be a little tricky to put this in. I'm going to try and put a screw sort of toenailed in and just started on this end, and then maybe I can catch it and hold it. It seemed to work. I'm going to put another one in here now. All right, now I'll go to the other side and do the same thing. So I decided to make one more vertical piece here in the middle to help support the siding panel up here. You can see I tried to cut it to match the peak, but ended up cutting it maybe just a little bit short. But that's okay. It doesn't really have to fit tight up here. Nobody's going to see it. And I can screw into the gusset plate to hold it at the top. So now I'll go over to the other side and frame that one up. Now on that side, I'm not going to put this horizontal stringer in because I don't ever plan to put a door over there. So we're just going to put 3 vertical studs in. Next, I'll be putting the sheathing on the sidewalls, building out the eave overhangs, and putting in the subfascias. If you want to see that or any of the other videos in my shed building series or support my channel, check the links in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.